morning, good afternoon, good evening. I managed to get this video on my social media. I found it really hilarious. This is a minister in Malawi being interviewed. Just listen to this.
You see, judge here, the judge.
Honorable Minister, you can do better. Honorable Minister, it's a simple, straightforward question. Out of 10,000 houses you promised to Malawi, Defense Force, to police, how many have you constructed? It's a simple, straightforward question.
It's not.
Is it 500? Is it 1,000?
It's not a simple, straightforward question.
Why is it not a simple and
my
straightforward
friend,
question?
it's figurative. You want me to tell you the numbers?
Yes.
But you could have told me that, Bwana, among the questions that I'm going to ask you, we are going to ask this. You want me to?
It is you who said you promised 10,000 houses.
And you just asked.
Out of 10,000,
we have built substantial number.
What is substantial number?
That substance.
I will choose to respect your position. It's you have failed. You have failed Malawians on that promise.
There's no. Budget dziko lino munali njala.
No. Out of 10,000 houses promised. Okay, okay, are you going to give me an answer or no?
I'm going to answer you.
Okay, so answer me.
You want me yes or no? Is that so?
No, it's not yes or no. I want a number. Give me a number.
I am not going to do that because I'm not. Let me explain.
Okay, please.
I'm saying in view of the catastrophic atmosphere that we had, drought, floods, donor flight, casket, we could not have started it all over again in earnest. But we have done the feasibility. We have built almost 200, and then we are going to finish.
There you have it.
But you are making me to just.
I just wanted a number. So out of 10,000, the DBB administration has given us 200.
And we are going to finish the other one.
Are you not embarrassed?
No way. There's no embarrassment. It's a process. You know what? That is your problem, you blind bad. You want the government program to start today and you finish it tomorrow.
Then where have you taken the money?
All development is a progress. You don't expect somebody says, I'm going to build a road. The road you start today, tomorrow. The road, it doesn't work like that. That's not that. Let me give you an example.
This is laughable. I think if you're a Zimbabwean, you'd quickly realize this is a very common story. Ever since the country's independence in 1980, Zanu PF has promised the people mass prosperity. Those of us old enough to remember those days in 1980, in the 1980s, will never forget Mugabe's famous Gutsa ruzhinji, mass prosperity. He never seemed to tire of making that promise. And he brought with him his scientific socialism, as he called it. And basically, he introduced free education, expanded healthcare, every May Day, Workers' Day, he announced across the board massive wage increases for workers. These were not negotiable. These were decreed. And for the business community to counteract these wage increases, they could not increase the prices of their goods and services because he also introduced price controls. Scientific socialism, he called it. In parallel with this, he also introduced his political patronage system, the chef culture, where the ruling elite were given lucrative jobs, salaries with perks galore. his ministers started driving the limousines, Mercedes-Benz limousines, and their salaries and packs, unbelievable. And this created the patronage system, the chef culture, which was the root cause of the gross mismanagement and the rampant corruption. This was voodoo economics, if the truth be told. This reckless spending was totally unsustainable. And by the end of the 80s, it was clear this could not go on. And so he went to the IMF, World Bank, to beg for financial assistance, which he was granted on condition that he ended his scientific socialism. He promised that, came back home, and the then Minister of Finance, Bernard Chizero, announced to the nation that there will be belt tightening. And so started cutting back on education, health, and lifted price controls. He stopped making the decrees of salary increments for the workers, etc., etc. So basically, the ordinary person was forced to tighten their belt. The interesting thing about it is that the chefs themselves did not tighten their belt. And that was the reason why the World Bank's ESAP, 1990 to 1995, and then phase two, the 1995 to 1999, never worked. His reckless spending for the ruling elite continued, unabated. And meanwhile, of course, during those days of ESAP, he cut out on his rhetoric of Gutsa ruzhinji. And the people were told that after ESAP, things will ease up and there'll be mass prosperity. To be quite honest, mass prosperity has been a mirage in Zimbabwe. Today, Mnangagwa calls it a vision 2030. And by that year, 2030, Zimbabweans are told that there will be an upper middle income nation. Of course, it's all nonsense. 2030 is only 6 years away. And the country at the moment is in the middle of an economic meltdown where unemployment is soared to 90%. And has remained there for the last 1.5 decades at least. Basic services have all but collapsed. Yesterday, I was talking on this program, we were talking about the pathetic wage increases that he was offering the teachers, $20 wage increase. And yet, inflation rate is a staggering 1,600%, over 1,600%. Infrastructure is all in the process of decay and rot. Zimbabwe's roads are in terrible conditions. Schools and hospitals are in a horrible state after decades of underfunding. Even in the urban areas, the country is failing to supply basic things like running water and electricity. Ever since the country's independence over 43 years ago now, the power generation capacity of the country has not improved, has not increased at all. The thermal power stations the country inherited at independence have not been extended. Only the last year that they managed to commission Wange stage 7 and 8. And yet those should have been completed in the early 80s. But Toka Gorge, which is to the ordinary person, Kariba, upstream of the existing Kariba Dam and Victoria Falls, has not been started. And yet those projects were already, the feasibility studies had already been done. And meanwhile, it's not that the country did not have the money. Billions of dollars have been poured into building mansions for the sheriffs. One has got to look at Mugabe's blue roof mansion in Harare, which is now, most of the time, reportedly, nobody's staying there because Grace Mugabe is hardly ever there, and their children are hardly there either. It costed a good 2 to 3 billion US dollars. Would have been enough to build Batoka Gorge. But that is what we are looking at here. Are we looking at Vision 2030, in which we'll be an upper middle income nation, when unemployment is still in the 80s? Because they've not been creating any jobs ever since Mnangagwa came into power 6 years ago. There hasn't been any significant employment opportunities created. The looting has gone into overdrive. And people are living in abject poverty. Are we expected to be an upper middle income nation? And yet we cannot see any signs of the green shoots of the economy recovery. Are we to be the only nation with an upper middle income status in which the majority of the people are still living in mud thatched huts in the rural areas, and in the urban centers, the shacks have been expanding, engulfing now what used to be the low density suburbs. They are all now becoming high density suburbs. Rugare, Magaba seems to be expanding to all the urban centers. Most of the low density suburbs, shopping areas, are just as congested and chaotic and dirty as Barimsika or Magaba. Because with 90% of the people unemployed, the majority are vendors now. And vendors go wherever they can try to sell a few things that they have. To be quite honest, I think we can honestly say that Zimbabwe Vision 2030 is just a mirage. It is Mugabe's mass prosperity, Gutsa ruzhinji. It was a mirage, and it has been moving all these last 40 years. And when we come to 2030, I'm sure that if Mnangagwa was to be interviewed, he will be giving the same feeble excuse as our friend here, the Malawi minister, is trying to give. And in his case, of course, the favorite excuse will be that Zimbabwe was under Western imposed sanctions. And that's why he failed to deliver on his promise of Vision 2030. And so the mirage, new target will be set. Zimbabwe will become an upper middle income nation by the year 2040. Give us another 10 years and we'll turn around the economy. This is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. And I'll say it here as I said it before. As long as you have got a regime that is able to rig the election and stay in power, you will always be chasing a mirage. You can never hold Zanu PF to account for anything. They'll rig the election as Mnangagwa did last year, and once in power, it's business as usual. The corruption, the mismanagement continues. And meanwhile, the people will be told, you have to be patient. Things will change. We are turning around the economy. You have to wait for Gutsa ruzhinji, for mass prosperity. And it's always a mirage. And in our case, I think the mirage is becoming so meaningless that he's trying to convince the people you can see a mirage even by moonlight, which is nonsense. Zimbabweans need to understand that without implementing the democratic reforms, we will never stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. How do we stop Zanu PF rigging the elections? We need to implement the democratic reforms. We got it right in the late 1990s when we said we needed democratic changes to be implemented. The opposition in Zimbabwe have been elected on the promise that they will implement the democratic changes necessary to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. That has been the primary purpose of the opposition. But they too have been able to move that target. It's become now a mirage as well. Before the GNU of 2008 to 2018, they kept promising that they will implement the democratic reforms. During the GNU itself, Morgan Tsvangirai and company had the golden opportunity to implement those reforms. Mugabe bribed them with the trappings of high office, the limousines, the ministerial limousines, the generous salaries and allowances, and for Morgan Tsvangirai himself, the US $4 million mansion. And the MDC guys forgot about the reforms. The people of Zimbabwe have got to understand that because that is the only way we're going to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. We need an opposition, competent opposition politicians who will implement those reforms. Without those reforms, we'll be just going round and round in circles. And at the present moment, ever since the GNU, in fact, the opposition have been participating in flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. Meanwhile, they're telling people lies about how they were going to win rigged elections. And it's unfortunate that the people themselves have failed to realize they're being shortchanged by the opposition. If we don't wake up to that reality, I don't see how we're going to break the present situation. Because, believe it or not, Zanu PF and MDC/CCC have now come to a cozy arrangement where MDC/CCC participate in flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy, and in return, they win a few gravy train seats. And we are stuck with a Zanu PF dictatorship. I don't see how, without implementing reforms, we're going to stop Zanu PF rigging the 2028 elections. And I also will say, I don't see how Chamisa and company are going to implement those reforms. Chamisa and company are going to assure the nation once again that they can win these elections without reforms. And so argue everybody to participate in the 2028 elections. And at the end of the day, turn around and say, no, Zanu PF rigged the elections. Meanwhile, you've participated, as one would say in Shona. And so Zanu PF gets its legitimacy. Chamisa and a few of his friends get their few gravy train seats. And so the dictatorship continues. We need to break this cycle. And we can only break it by realizing that at the present moment, the present opposition as it's presently constituted will never implement any meaningful democratic changes to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. And therefore, then this blind loyalty to Chamisa and company is not doing ourselves any favors. We need to wake up to that reality. We should stop chasing mirage. Zanu PF is asking us to chase this mirage of Vision 2030. Meanwhile, the opposition is also asking us to chase this mirage of the opposition winning rigged elections. We need to wake up. Thank you very much for listening, and good night.